Did you know there was just a bill introduced into the Texas state legislature that if it becomes a law would make it a crime for a transgender man to represent to his employer that he is a man? Okay, so this proposed Texas state law is aimed at prohibiting what it calls gender identity fraud. The law prohibits identifying to the government or an employer that your sex is anything other than the sex you were assigned at birth. If passed, this would become a crime in Texas punishable by up to 2 years in prison and a fine of up to $10,000. I know that's a lot to take in, and there's a ton to discuss, but I'm going to keep this video focused on the employment aspect. Under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the law prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. And the question is, what does sex cover? Does it extend to gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation? Well, this question was answered by the Supreme Court in 2020 in a decision called Bostock versus Clayton County. Justice Neil Gorsuch found that discriminating against an individual on the basis of their sexual orientation or because they're transgender is necessarily discrimination on the basis of sex and a violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Justice Gorsuch provided the following explanation. Or take an employer who fires a transgender person who was identified as a male at birth, but who now identifies as a female. If the employer retains an otherwise identical employee who was identified as female at birth, the employer intentionally penalizes a person identified as male at birth for traits or actions that it tolerates in an employee identified as female at birth. Justice Gorsuch went on to find that for an employer to discriminate against employees for being homosexual or transgender, the employer must intentionally discriminate against individual men and women in part because of sex. That has always been prohibited by Title VII's plain terms, and that should be the end of the analysis. So, is it possible for this proposed Texas state law to coexist with federal anti-discrimination laws? I don't think so. I mean, what is the point of federal workplace protections on the basis of sex, which, as the Supreme Court held, includes transgender status, if an employer can then report that employee as having committed a crime based on the same protected transgender status? This proposed Texas law completely undermines federal anti-discrimination laws.